One day, the whole town of Whispering Pines was in an uproar. Everyone was frantically running around preparing for some big event. Rudy James, who just put on his cowboy spatula in his holster, could hear the buzz of the town from his house. He looked out the window to see what all that darn tootin' commotion was about. Almost putting his cowboy boots on the wrong feet, Rudy James left the house in a flash so he might ask another cowboy or girl why the town was in such a fervor. Walking down the dusty streets of town, he began to see the ruckus for himself. With packages and parchments in hand, cowboys and girls were running with great haste to some unknown destination. Rudy James even attempted to stop some of the cowboys and girls to ask why everyone was in such a hurry. However, like busy worker ants, everyone would quickly shrug Rudy James off and rush to their task. There was also occasional few that would stop and say, "I'm busy preparing for tomorrow," before they scurried off. Rudy James soon became confused by all the commotion that was going on. From deep within himself, he had to muster up all his strength. He took one deep breath and shouted like the rooster crows, "What is going on?" For the first time that morning, the town came to a hush, and in the silence, Rudy James could hear crickets singing their raspy song. "Well, isn't it obvious?" said a cowboy that held a mound of wrapping paper in hand. Rudy James shrugged, still not knowing what everyone else already knew. A cowboy tapped Rudy James's shoulder and pointed to a sign that swayed in the wind. Under the backdrop of the morning sun, Rudy James had to squint to read the sign. He began to sound out the words that were written on the sign. Bulete's birthday tomorrow. Y'all are welcome to come. It's Bullet's birthday, Rudy James thought to himself. Bullete was one of the many cowgirls that also lived in the town of Whispering Pines. In school, Rudy James had already noticed Bullete, who sat 2 rows in front of him during class lectures. Bullete was also known for her bright red pigtails that poked out from her bonnet. Shucks, Rudy James thought to himself sheepishly. How could he have forgotten it was Bullet's birthday tomorrow? After all, Bullet was the nicest cowgirl in all the Wild West, and her welcoming smile would make everyone feel like they were home. Rudy James! A harsh, raspy voice hollered over the shoulder of Rudy James's back. Not knowing if it was the hot summer's day or the soft clanking of spurs slowly inching closer behind him, Rudy James began to feel the sweat trickle down his back. He mustered up all his strength and turned to see where that raspy voice came from. And there he was. The roughest, the toughest, and the surliest cowboy of them all. Ned Mahoney. Ned, who was another one of Rudy James's elementary classmate, had a scowl on his face under his dark cowboy hat. Ned stopped a couple feet in front of Rudy James and stood there with his patented rawhide leather jacket. As Ned Mahoney walked, the tassels on the arms of his jacket blew in the wind. When the other cowboys compared their talents like shooting sarsaparilla bottles or spitting, they all knew in the end that Ned Mahoney's talent took the cake. In fact, Ned Mahoney was one of the most notorious cowboys of them all because Ned was the only cowboy his age that could grow a mustache. Never had a kid in elementary been able to grow a mustache, especially a mustache like Ned's. This mustache was one of the most famous in the whole Wild West. On the left side of Ned's nose, the mustache was thick, dark, and bushy. Yet on the right side of the nose, the mustache was thin, squiggly, and came to a point. Occasionally, when Ned sneezed, the mustache would whistle a soft tune. Sometimes, when the other cowboys and girls gathered to square dance at the local barn, Ned styled his mustache by sticking his finger in his ears and pulling out a glob of wax to form the right side of his mustache into a twirl. Rudy James, Ned Mahoney growled again. I know you're in grade school, so I know you can read them sign up there. Ned Mahoney pointed towards the sign that invited the town to Bullete's birthday party. Yeah, I can read the sign, Rudy James said cautiously. I know you can sound out the words, y'all are welcome to come. But if I see any sign of you in your cowboy spatula at the party tomorrow. Ned paused in his speech and stepped closer to Rudy James, standing so close that they almost touched noses. A crowd began to gather to watch the two young boys who stood toe to toe. A gust of wind kicked up the dirt, and a small cyclone of dust danced around them. Rudy James noticed the eerie silence. It was as if he and Ned Mahoney stood in a barren ghost town. All that could be heard was the faint sound of Ned's breathing, which caused a soft whistle to vibrate from his mustache. Ned Mahoney grinned a mischievous smile as he chuckled to himself. Mustard yellow teeth hung crooked from the curtain of Ned Mahoney's smile. I know what I would do, Ned said as he stared deep into Rudy James' ocean blue eyes. I'm gonna. A horrific cry came from the crowd who watched in anticipation of the duel. It was a cry that seemed to be filled with tears. Ned! The girl's voice called out again. Ned Mahoney knew that voice all too well and jumped so high that his black leather hat almost leapt from his head like a bullfrog. There was Bullete, pushing through the crowds with tears running down her cheeks. Ned Mahoney, Bullete shouted as the crowd continued to part to let her through. Pardon, ma'am, Ned Mahoney said sheepishly as he took off his hat. As Bullete stepped into the center of the ring, all the cowboys joined in with Ned Mahoney by taking off their hats in sign of respect for the young lady. I did not know you volunteered for the party invitation committee, Mr. Mahoney, Bullete said with her arms propped at her hips. Well, ma'am, Ned stuttered as the words seemed to trip from his mouth. Rudy James began to see the sweat dripping from Ned's brow as he frantically tried to think of an excuse for his behavior. Now, Ned. Bullete pointed towards a sign that hung on the top of the post. I know you're in elementary school as well, and I know that you can read that sign. With his head bowed down in shame, Ned Mahoney looked up at the sign that creaked and moaned as it swayed in the wind. What does my invitation say? Bullete asked. It says... Hesitant words trickled forward. It says you're all welcome to come. Bullete stood there in silence to let the words sink in. Looking down at his boots, with his hat still in hand, Ned Mahoney kicked a small pebble a short distance. And what do you think that means, Ned? Bullete began to soften her stance. It means everyone is invited, Ned said sheepishly as he continued to avoid Bullete's eyes. Yes, she began to smile, and she turned towards Rudy James. Oh no, Rudy James thought as he began to nervously fidget with his spatula that rested in its holster. Perhaps he was next to disappoint Bullete, and the thought cut him to his heart. But her smile was so welcoming that it told Rudy James otherwise. I would like to give you a personal invitation to my birthday, she said proudly. As Bullet spoke, Rudy James began to blush, having looked upon Bullet's lovely smile. She politely asked, Will you come? Rudy James searched deep within himself to muster up all his courage, but no matter how much he tried, all Rudy James could do was nod. Splendid, she said with glee, and she turned towards Ned Mahoney with the same welcoming smile. And I would love you to come too, Mr. Mahoney. Ned Mahoney, who was still looking at the dirt, hesitantly looked up. Seeing the smile, he quickly looked down again and nodded in response. Bullet, not wanting to have any more of the tomfooleries of the boys' mini showdown, walked off so that she could continue to prepare for her birthday party. The crowd parted to let her by, and all the men, still holding their hats in their hand in respect, each said, Ma'am, as she passed by. Not getting the expected duel that the crowd anticipated, they slowly dispersed, one by one, until Rudy James and Ned Mahoney were the only cowboys left standing in the middle of the dusty street. Rudy James looked back at Ned Mahoney, hoping that his anger was gone, and perhaps they could let bygones be bygones. But that was not what Rudy James found. Slowly, Ned Mahoney looked up from the ground, and Rudy James could see that his face was as red as a tomato. Rudy James could not break Ned's stare that betrayed his anger. Ned looked so mad that you could cook an egg off his forehead, so mad that his lopsided mustache began to curl and uncurl as he breathed through his nose like a bull. Rudy James, Ned spoke in a whisper that was so low that Rudy James could barely make out the words he was saying. My position still stands. I better not see you and your spatula at Bullet's birthday tomorrow. And with a huff, Ned Mahoney stomped off with his spurs clanking behind him. Rudy James fidgeted with his hand on his trusted cowboy spatula as Bullet's personal invitation to her birthday party echoed in his mind. As the thought of her words, I want you to come to my birthday party, Rudy James, it finally sunk in. Bullet wants me to come to her birthday. Rudy James could no longer be able to contain his joy, jumped in the air as he clicked his boots together, yelling, Yippee! With all the joy that surged through his heart, a darkness crept in as Ned Mahoney's last words began to play in his mind. I better not see you and your spatula at Bullet's birthday. What was Rudy James to do? Who was he to listen to? Should he listen to Bullet or Ned Mahoney? Should he take risk of going to Bullet's party knowing it would make Ned angry? Then Rudy James remembered Bullet's welcoming smile, a smile that gave him courage despite the risks he might face. So soon he felt determined and decided not to care what Ned Mahoney thought. I'm going to Bullet's birthday tomorrow, and I'm going to have a darn tootin' good time. He cheered as he began to run home with all his speed he could muster so he could tell Grandpa Rufus the good news.